What's good, people? I know this is looks like story time on a Friday night. Sitting out in the car, just thinking about boxing and the Eagles game tomorrow. Before I get into it, like, subscribe, all that good stuff on my YouTube, Gem Music 856. And without further ado, I want to talk about boxing because it's been a minute. I want to talk about Terence Crawford and his retirement, and I want to go over his career a little bit, talk about the belt situation briefly, and then get into the Teofimolopez and Shakur Stevenson fight, and then cap this off by going over the Eagles game tomorrow, where they have the chance to not only clinch the division, but repeat as division champs for the first time since 2004 in Andy Reid's heyday, in the prime of that run that he had with the Eagles. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about Terence Crawford, man. 42-0, 42 have tried, 42 have failed, and he's going out on top. Just defeated Canelo Alvarez for all 4 belts at 168. Already did so against Earl Spence at 147 as well. I mean, and then he did so as well at either 135 or 140. I can't remember the weight. I mean, what a career, man. I mean, what else can you say? What else can you say about that? And I thought he went out at the right time. I know some people say that he's on the Mount Rushmore. He should be at least in the conversation with some of the greats. And then some people say he didn't fight enough people. So I want to get into a little bit of that. And I'm actually very pleasantly surprised to see how Terence Crawford's career has played out and ended, at least at this point. You know, if he doesn't come back, because he started from the ground up. He didn't get any shakes, any shortcuts, nothing. The machine was not behind him, at least not in the way that it typically is with many other boxers. So you talk about a dude that came out of anonymity. I wouldn't say that Timothy Bradley discovered him per se, but Tim Bradley, he's one of the first people, at least to my knowledge, that saw something in Terence Crawford outside of the people that originally were backing him. Because at the time, this is over 10 years ago, and Tim Bradley, shout out to Tim Bradley for putting out the sparring footage that he's been talking about ad nauseum over these years as the central reason as to why he had so much belief and confidence in Terence Crawford. Shout out for him for releasing that footage, because even just looking at about 5 to 10 minutes of it, you can clearly see how sharp Terence Crawford was, even at that time, early on in his career, without really having, I guess, what you would consider proper guidance from a very, very well-oiled training machine. And he was in there going toe-to-toe with Tim Bradley. Looked like the IQ was right there. And this is Tim Bradley in his prime. I remember when Tim Bradley was 27, I remember seeing Tim Bradley on the cover of the Ring magazine, pretty much as the next big thing. This is before the fights with Pacquiao. This is before the fight with Provodnikov, I believe. You know, when he was, the next one. And he saw it at that point. And he asked him, or somebody else asked Terence Crawford, well, when's your next fight, or who's promoting you, or pretty much like what direction, where's your direction? And Bud was like, well, I'm pretty much doing this on my own for the most part. So eventually, at least somebody who was super talented saw him and got the word out. And fast forward, he's eventually on with Top Rank and Bob Arum, and he's not getting all the big fights. And one thing that I hear constantly is that, one, why didn't he fight the big names at 130 or 135 on up? 130, 135, 140. Why wasn't he fighting the big names? And one reason is because a lot of those guys, at least to my knowledge, they were avoiding Terence Crawford, because Terence Crawford was high risk, low reward. You're going to make a medium to low amount of money for a guy who could spark you out, and he doesn't even have a name. Like, you're not going to gain any fanfare out of it. If anything, you're going to lose your fanfare if you lose to a Terence Crawford. And because of that, guys like Crawford, Pacquiao's, the Lomachenkos, you go down the list of Triple G's, they got avoided early on. It took them a while to build up to the point where they could start to have leverage in the game. So, early on, Top Rank is paying him a lot of money to not really fight big names. And some people, I would say, held that against him. And although I disagree with that point, I can understand where they're coming from. But with proper context, you can kind of see he wasn't really the person who was avoiding fights or pricing himself out. He was one of those guys that was being avoided. I would imagine Beterbiev was somewhat similar. Paul Williams, the former welterweight champ, tall, lanky, devastating puncher who was avoided by many people. He got into that motorcycle accident. People were avoiding him. Like guys like that, people would go out of their way to avoid. And eventually, he would start putting on these performances, even though it was against lesser talent, and then people wanted to see him. I remember at one point he had that fight. It was in an outside arena. I don't remember what fellow he was boxing, but he got him up out of there in spectacular fashion. And I remember thinking, yo, who is that dude? I kind of heard his name, but I was like, yo, who is he? And I'm pretty sure I wasn't the other person. So you started seeing people ask to see him fight more. And then eventually some of these names that were at the top, they would say, oh, well, get a belt. And meanwhile, they're fighting, they're going after every other person who's a mandatory, but a guy like Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford wasn't the only person avoided, but he was definitely one of them. So eventually, he gets a belt, and he's able to then start to get those fights. And this is where the belts are beneficial. Having multiple belts are beneficial. Otherwise, without having one of the 4 belts, Terence Crawford wouldn't have gotten the buzz that he needed to be able to get in line to be able to get a fight against Viktor Postol, who had defeated, I don't know if it was Jorge Linares or who it was at the time that he defeated. And Viktor Postol, no, it was the Argentinian power puncher. Lucas Matisse. When he was able to beat Lucas Matisse, and nobody saw that coming, including me, because none of us had ever heard of Viktor Postol. And I didn't do my homework before that fight, so I just figured Matisse is going to spark this dude out. And somebody correct me if I have the name wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Lucas Matisse. And after he beat him, now, because Terence Crawford had enough clout at that point, he was able to get a fight with Viktor Postol, and I believe that may have been a unification bout. And when he beat Viktor Postol, then people started paying attention to him. But remember, at the time, people were saying Viktor Postol, oh, he's sharp, because he had Freddie Roach as his trainer, and he looked like the type of guy that could give a lot of people problems with that in and out pendulum step style that you see from a lot of these European block fighters. And I remember going into that fight, people were not saying that this guy was just some has-been. He was a nobody. And this is a trend with Terence Crawford and a few other fighters as well, as to people trying to disparage their opponents or their resume. And going into that fight, people were not saying that about Viktor Postol. And if you look at the fight, outside of the 1 or 2 knockdowns he had on Postol, Postol actually did a fairly good job in that fight. And his pendulum step allowed him to be competitive. And I thought that was a very, very good win for Terence Crawford. Now you fast forward, eventually he has to fight with Yuriorkis Gamboa. And to be fair, it was a Gamboa that was past his prime. But he still was able to beat Gamboa, even though Gamboa was still a very, very high-level fighter at that point. That being said, I think Terence Crawford was bound to move up in weight, and he showed it in that fight. He was able to do what he wanted to because of the weight advantage and the reach advantage. So that was a big name on his resume, and that started making people really pay attention to who he was. I remember walking through Dave & Buster's in Philly, and although I already thought that Terence Crawford was going to win, because I think Gamboa had if he didn't have a knockout loss, he may have gotten hurt or wobbled in a fight before, or had a tough fight or some of that nature, where I started to see chinks in the armor, and he may have been even more past it at that point. But I remember looking at the TV and saying, oh, Crawford's going to win this fight. That was a big name for his resume. Now you see chatterings about 140 and 147. And eventually he started to get closer and closer to moving up to 147, and then names like Spence came into the picture. Earl Spence, they had a run-in about 2 or 3 years before the Spence and Crawford fight. And, you know, they're talking back and forth. Crawford's like, I can beat you. And Spence is like, there's no way you'll hurt me or knock me out or whatever the case may be. But you look at these guys like Spence, and I'm not blaming Spence for this, but PBC fighters, it's almost like they wanted to keep them away from people like a Terence Crawford or guys like that. Mind you, either at 140 or 147, Crawford tried to get a fight with Manny Pacquiao, and Manny Pacquiao's team, a member of his team, is on record saying that they didn't think that it was a good matchup stylistically. And from their vantage point, it would have been a replay of Mayweather-Pacquiao, because he was like, nobody wants to see that again. It's just going to be more or less like a guy that's going to be a boxer on the move against a guy who wants to create the action, and it's going to be a boring fight for the people. Or it could be because Terence Crawford is a very, very dangerous young opponent with very little upside for Manny, but high risk on the back end for him. I'm not saying that's the truth one way or another, but these are the things that have to be considered. And that's not the only person that's happened to Crawford with. That happened with Spence. Spence was able to fight every possible mandatory but Terence Crawford up to a certain point, and then eventually the fight became too big for them to not have it. And at one point, it seemed like it wasn't going to happen the December before the fight happened, because the negotiations fell through, and I remember being pissed. And then they got it together, and then they had the fight, and eventually he was able to completely dominate the fight. And most people go after the fight, they were like, oh, Spence had the car crash, the accident. He wasn't right after the second one, especially. A lot of the drinking that he did. But nobody was saying all these things going into the fight with Danny Garcia or after he beat Yuriorkis Ugas. Nobody was saying any of those things. They were saying Ugas just gave a really hard fight to Manny and took the belt from Manny, and Spence just beat him like nothing. Nobody was using the excuse of Earl Spence being injured going into the fight. And hell, nobody even used the excuse of Kell Brook being injured in his previous fight with Triple G to try to diminish Spence's win over Kell Brook. Whereas you look at guys like Manny Pacquiao, they're like, oh, well, he beat Ricky Hatton, but it's after Floyd beat him. It don't matter if he had a dominant win in the way that he did. It was after Floyd beat him. Or with Terence Crawford, oh, he beat Earl Spence, but it was after he was injured after the car crashes, even though everybody was saying he was the best thing since sliced bread coming back from those accidents when he ran through the gambit, snatching up belts, being able to beat a Sean Porter before the accident, and then being able to beat Ugas and Danny Garcia after the accident. When he beat Mikey Garcia, I mean, yeah, we knew he was too big to be fighting Mikey, but nobody really was up in arms about that fight, if you're being honest with yourself. I remember the lead up going into these fights. A lot of people like to have revisionist history and redact things like they're doing with the files that came out today. You know, if you turn on CNN, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not saying what those were because I don't want to get dinged on the platform, but, you know, people like to have revisionist history. People don't remember that guys like Terence Crawford had to get it the tough way. So and this is all to say that leading into his retirement, he got stripped of his WBC title that he won from Canelo Alvarez. He still had the other 3 belts, and his reasoning why he didn't want to pay the sanctioning fees to the WBC was that, one, they were asking for more money than the other sanctioning bodies were. So from his vantage point, why do you think you're so much better than them? And 2, because back in the olden days, as I said in my previous video, go check it out. I put it out sometime earlier this week. The lineal championship was the original belt that determined who was the champ. There was not a multiple belt system. And I can delve into this in more detail later on, but originally from the early 1900s to the 1950s, or say late 50s, it was a one belt system, the lineal title, and it wasn't even like a physical belt. It was more like an idea. Like the roughest guy on the block says, I'm the best. Somebody else who's really talented says, I'm the best. They fight, and then whoever wins is the champion. And they stay champion until they get beat. There's not like there's 4 other champions. And the Ring magazine was created and served a big role in order to keep track of who was the lineal champion. So that's why oftentimes the lineal title is referred to as the Ring title. The Ring doesn't literally have their own belt, but they are the overseer of the upkeep or the record keeping for the lineal title. So oftentimes the Ring belt and the lineal title get spoken interchangeably. But up until the late 50s, there was only one title. And even though the WBA was formed in 1962 and the WBC was formed the year after, 1963, and Muhammad Ali beat Sonny Liston for his either the first or the second time in 1964, he was still recognized as the lineal champion by both of those organizations. They didn't have a quote-unquote singular belt for those organizations yet. So before he went to Vietnam, even though the WBA and WBC were officially sanctioning bodies, there was still only one belt, the lineal title. And that's what Muhammad Ali was, the heavyweight champ. Now, after he refused to go to Nam, they stripped him of his titles. Then the WBA named, I believe the boxer's name was Jimmy Ellis, as their champion, and then the WBC named Joe Frazier, Smoking Joe Frazier from Philadelphia, their champion. So then, but Muhammad Ali remained the lineal champ into his forced retirement. So when he came back, he was still the lineal champion, much in the same way Tyson Fury was still technically the lineal champion when he came back from his self-imposed hiatus after beating Klitschko. So when Muhammad Ali came back, when Joe Frazier beat Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier became the lineal champion and the WBC title holder, while Jimmy Ellis remained the WBC champion. And I believe that it was at that point that you can officially say there was a schism in the old system, and now you had technically a 2-belt system, the WBA champ and the WBC champ. And then later on, in 83, the WBO was formed, and that was the 3rd belt. And then in 88, the IBF was formed, or vice versa. It doesn't matter. In 83 and 88, the last 2 sanctioning bodies came into place. So then you had the onset of the 3rd, and then by proxy, the 4-belt era, or the 3 and then the 4-belt era. So I think that probably Leonard and Hearns and all of them were the last big wave of champions that we had before the technical 3 and 4 belt era, and Tyson was that transitional period into that 4-belt era. So all that to say that champions were recognized as champions long before these sanctioning bodies were here, and as far as I'm concerned, they'll be recognized that way as long after they're gone. When we talk about Mike Tyson being champ, Ali, Sugar Ray Robinson, Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, Alexander Usyk, Terence Crawford, Earl Spence, so on and so forth. Just, any name you can think of. Most people, when they look back, they don't remember the belts they had. They just remember they were champion at one point. And in this day and age, if you become undisputed, it's held in the same regard as being the lineal champion, regardless of whether that should be that way or not. We're going to remember Terence Crawford. We're going to remember Alexander Usyk as being the lineal champ, the guys. Even Tyson Fury, we're going to remember him as being, well, maybe not Tyson Fury, but who else was undisputed? Canelo Alvarez. We'll remember Canelo Alvarez, despite him really being one of the poster childs for the WBC. We'll remember him as being the guy when he got all 4 belts at 168. That's what we'll remember him as, not necessarily as the WBA champ or the IBF champ or the WBC champ. I think that those belts are really good in terms of giving exposure to boxers who otherwise would have gotten left out of the history books when we think of the great boxers. Right? Like in Muhammad Ali's day, it was him going against Sonny Liston. There wasn't like there was 3 other guys that also were going to get a shot if Ali failed, per se. They would have to wait in line like one after another, as opposed to you being able to get to the goal quicker. Maybe you fight the WBC champ while the IBF champ is having their fight, and you get both belts. Like you can shorten your wait time, so to speak, while getting exposure to the mass media, because at least you have a title. So in that sense, I think that the sanctioning bodies and their titles are good. But on the flip side, I think the sanctioning bodies and sometimes some of the boxers get carried away in thinking that the belt makes the champion. That is not correct. Let's just take this back to the schoolyard playground. When you have 2 of the best people in school fighting, there's no belts. There might be a piece of candy as a prize at the end, but whoever wins the fight, they are considered the champion. You don't have 3 other people with belts and they're considered great fighters too. No, they got to fight now the main champ to be considered to be a great fighter, whether they win or lose. So I think that people like Oscar De La Hoya, and Oscar was pretty adamant about his displeasure about Terence Crawford not wanting to pay the sanctioning fees. But my message to Oscar is that although you fought for the WBC belt and other titles, and it really is a part of you, and you took a lot of pride in that, and I don't knock that, you have to understand that you were the Hall of Famer. You forged that legacy. Not the belts didn't make you, buddy. You made the belts through the greatness that you put out in the ring all the time. And as a boxing purist, you should know that the lineal title is the only title that really matters, if we're being honest. Like I was mentioning earlier with the breakdown I was given. That's the title that matters. So although you're entitled to feel the way you want to feel, you have to respect where Terence Crawford's coming from, and as far as I'm concerned, he has more legitimacy in his argument than Oscar does. That's just my objective viewpoint, and I love both fighters. I'm a huge Oscar fan as well. I thought that, and many others thought that he beat Floyd Mayweather. I thought that there was a case for that in their fight, but I just disagree with him on this matter. Looking at the comments real quick. What's going on, Jules? Appreciate you tuning in. I'm talking about Terence Crawford, his retirement, the WBC stripping him of his belts early on, and what I thought about that situation. Go back and look at the video. I gave like a whole breakdown and timeline of where the belts originated from and things like that. But I think that overall he's had a great career. I think that he made history in a lot of different ways, and he showed you how hard work pays off when you take the long way, no shortcuts, not popping for any PEDs, not being loud and braggadocious, not needing to shuck and jive and act like a clown at a carnival in order to get attention for fights. No, he did it his way. Typically classy and respectful. He will turn up if you want to get flippant, if you want to get belligerent, he'll turn up with you. But in general, he seems like a pretty laid-back, chill dude that's just focused, man. He goes in there to win. You don't get distracted by the side talking, the chirping and whatnot, which is why I like him. He's one of the fighters from the U.S. that is humble and focused and doesn't get sidetracked by distractions and social media and all this crap out here. He reminds me very much of the Eastern Bloc fighters, how when they step into that podium, do that face-off, they just look like hitmen. They look like assassins. Like, they're not there to get into their emotions or get up in arms. They're just there to fuck you up, man. And it's not personal. And that's why I like guys like Manny Pacquiao as well, Floyd Mayweather. Despite Mayweather's antics, when you really pay close attention, Floyd, he's all business, right? So guys like that, he's cut from that cloth. So I think Terence Crawford earned everything that he got, and it's time to give him his flowers while he's living. And all these other boxers that have been great, that haven't had to cut corners or forego their morals and their ethics, give them their flowers while they're here, so that we can get more like them moving forward. Abdullah Mason is another guy on the come up that I think can be one of the greats if he stays on the path he is, and he's humble. So we need more boxers like that, and I hope we get them. That being said, let me know what you think about Terence Crawford's retirement, what you think about him as a fighter, his resume, his last fights, especially the Spence fight and the Majumdar fight, and then culminating with the Canelo fight. And then let me know what you think about the WBC situation, with people's opinions on whether he should have paid the sanctioning fees or whether he shouldn't have, if the boxers have enough respect for the sanctioning bodies, or if the sanctioning bodies are acting like global monopolies and not giving the fighters the type of respect that they're supposed to be getting. Let me know in the comments. And I'm going to shift over to the fight with Teofimolopez and Shakur Stevenson. And this is just really my surface level insights. I'm going to actually look at some of the footage, especially the Zepeda fight that he had, as well as Teo's fight that he had in Times Square. I don't remember who he fought, so I can get a better gauge of where these fighters are at in their last 3 to 4 fights. But just from a surface level observation, I think this is a great matchup. You're getting 2 fighters in their prime. I forgot how old Shakur is, but he might only be like 24 or 23. He's young as shit. And then Teo's only 28 years old. He's in his prime, man. You're getting this fight between 2 guys in their prime. One is the top dog, one of the top dogs, if not the top dog, at 140. And then Shakur is trying to go up in weight from 135 to 140 to take his spot. So, you know, both of the guys about the same height. Both of the guys about the same reach. I think that Teo has a half-inch advantage in terms of height and reach on Shakur, but other than that, it's pretty even. This is going to be a very interesting fight, and it's going to be, in my opinion, until I look into it further, just first insights, one of Shakur's toughest fights, because he's facing the real one. Regardless of all the politics behind this fight going into it, you know, the quote-unquote possible racism on Teo's side, I have to go through the news clippings and really see what's what. But there's a lot of, in the backstory, this is going to be a real fight for Shakur Stevenson. He's not going to go in there and run over a guy like Teo. I don't foresee it. And I think Teo is going to be one of the first guys that really is going to catch Shakur off guard in terms of his quickness and speed. Because Shakur is lightning quick, but so is Teo. And he got dynamite in his hands. And Shakur don't have that. Shakur has really phenomenal defense. He's one of the best defensive fighters in the game. But it's a matter of defense versus offense in my mind, because I don't think that Shakur is going to have the monopoly on speed and quickness in this fight the way that he's used to. Nor is he going to have any reach advantage if he's had it in his previous 4 to 5 fights. So this is going to be a very interesting one. But the face-off at the press conference fire, because especially Teo's dad, man, his dad was really getting into it with Shakur, man. It was going back and forth, dude. And his dad's kind of like Danny Garcia's dad in a lot of ways. So I already know the build-up to this fight is going to be phenomenal. But in that press conference, they were chirping. But Teofimolopez, he was laid back and calm. And if you know Teo, the old Teo, he was one of the easiest people for you to get under his skin. No control over his emotions. Limited control over his emotions. But in my opinion, sometime right after the Lomachenko fight, it seemed like that fight, or maybe one or a few after, really matured him, man. And he's still immature in some ways, but in that ring, he don't get all up in arms. He don't get all huffy puffy at the press conferences no more. He just, even when he's corny, he just seems confident in just being at peace. And he was like that in the press conference. And then at their private sit down, I forget the guy's name. He does a lot of these sit downs between the fighters. They're sitting at the table across from each other, and he's asking them questions, and they're going back and forth, and Shakur's talking about some things he didn't like that Teo said and did. And Teo, the whole time, regardless of whether you agree with what he was saying or not, it seemed every time Shakur tried to get under his skin, he just brushed it off like it was nothing. He didn't even let it faze him. He was like, yeah, Shakur is like, I'm quick. I'm this, like, we respect each other, but I'm this, I'm that, whether it's his quickness or his defense. And Teo, his basic response was pretty much like, yo, I know you're a good fighter. We're both here to do our job. I'm here to hurt you. You're trying to take my spot, and I'm trying not to let that happen. And I'm going to try to hurt you in the process, and it's going to be a different universe when you step in the ring with me. And he didn't say it in this disrespectful or flippant way. He was just being honest. I think it's going to be different. It's going to be the first time it's going to be really different for Shakur. And it's also going to be different for Teo. So I'm looking forward to covering that fight. So we'll see how things play out as these weeks progress, and we see more from their training camp and as we lead into the fight. But let me know what you think of that fight, if you're excited for it, if you took anything away from the press conference and the sit down. Do you think that Shakur is able to get under Teo's skin even though Teo's not trying to show it? Do you think he's getting under his dad's skin and that's going to affect Teo? Or do you think that the opposite is true and that Shakur is trying to play these mind games, but Teo seems to have an answer for everything Shakur tries to do to get under his skin and seems completely unbothered? Let me know in the comments below. And then last but not least, let's go ahead and talk about the Eagles real quick. Not a whole lot to say. We got the big win last week against the Raiders. Look, I'm a Raiders fan whenever they're not playing Philly, but let's be honest. We all knew the Raiders were just showing up for a paycheck. It kind of looked like a scrimmage game in preseason at one point in the third quarter onward. And the Eagles' offense did what they were supposed to. It was a get back on track game, and Jalen Hurts really looked phenomenal in that game, as did A.J. Brown and Smitty. 2 catches, 50 yards for Smitty. And I really like what the offense was able to do in spots with the run game. Defense, I mean, what else is there to be said? Kenny Pickett had no time. He got his head knocked off. I mean, there was like 7 sacks. So, great game last week. And now you have the Commanders. Jalen Daniels is done for the year, so he's done. And you're going to be dealing with Marcus Mariota, who, I mean, he didn't do a whole lot last week. So, not only do you have a chance to clinch the division next week if you win, and officially, for all intents and purposes, end Dallas' season if they still even had a shot, but you're going to be able to repeat as division champs for the first time since 2004. You know how long that's been? In 20 years. The last time the Eagles repeated as division champions, or I think any team in the NFC East repeated as division champions, was 2004, the year that Andy and Teo and Donovan and their squad went to the Super Bowl. 2003 and 2004, it was like we couldn't be touched. Even more so than 2001 and 2. And I'm telling you, man, maybe it's a sign of things to be. This team may be turning the corner and making history there. But if they are able to get their act together against the Commanders and have another repeat of that and start doing some of the things they did last week against the Raiders, bringing guys in motion, oh, man, wouldn't you know it, they figured out that you can move A.J. Brown to the slot. And I think that's where he got his touchdown from, the one he caught over the middle. He caught that in stride. But that's a product of them manipulating the defense throughout the game in ways that they just have not been doing for one reason or another, including having Jalen work out of under center more. So Kevin Patullo was saying that Jalen seems to be more comfortable working out of center. I would think particularly in 12 personnel, one running back, 2 tight ends. Let him do his thing. So I think that the Eagles are in a good spot. Let me know what you think is going to happen tomorrow, and if you think the Eagles will clinch the division, and what you need to see in tomorrow's game to give you confidence that they're going to have a shot to have a deep and successful playoff run. Let me know in the comments below, and I hope everybody's staying safe, chilling back on a Friday. You finish work, sit back, have a nice meal. If you do that, have a cold one if that's what you're into, and just enjoying yourselves and relaxing. And I'll catch you on the next episode. And you know what? P.S. I'll probably be talking about what happened with the Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua fight. I'm not into covering those type of events. I think it's a detriment to boxing, so I don't really cover the events. But I'll definitely be talking about what happened, especially if Jake Paul somehow finds a way to defeat Anthony Joshua. But with that, I'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.